Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Mythgard Academy class on the Dispossessed. This is class number 3, as we are hoping to get through the first 6 chapters now of the Dispossessed. Remember that next week we're not going to do additional reading. I have no aspirations wholly to complete our discussion of the first 6 chapters, so this is going to be our first pause in the reading. And I'm going to remind you again at the end of class that I would love to hear any questions or thoughts that you guys have in preparation for next class session. That should be a good time to do some of those if we get a chance. And yeah, Arthur, thanks for reminding me. For those of you who want to participate in a live chat, those of you, especially those of you who are new, everything you enter into the chat section here in the webinar window tonight will come to me so that I'll be able to see it and respond to your comments and things. But I want to kind of keep that clear of back and forth chat among students so that I can follow it and keep up with the things that the observations you guys are wanting to make and the comments that you guys are making about the text. So that's why I have that moderated so that again, anything you type I can see and I can see it right away. But I won't show up for everybody else. If you do want to talk amongst yourselves, which I know many of you do on a weekly basis, just go to mythgard.org and to the Dispossessed page on the Mythgard Academy tab of the mythgard.org site, and you will see at the bottom of the page a link to the student chat room where you guys can talk amongst yourselves. So, okay, cool. Welcome back. As I said, now, I want to start off with some sort of announcements and reminders. Of course, the main thing that is going on these days is our fundraising campaign, which is off to an awesome start. We're now just about 2 weeks in. And I've been giving you guys updates over the last couple of weeks. Remember, this class started the day before the fundraiser kicked off. So, and since then, we've now received $19,000 in gifts and pledges so far towards our annual fund, the Signum University annual fund for this year. That has just been. I am always really humbled by the generosity of our students and supporters, and very, very grateful that you guys have enabled us to do what we have been doing and what we plan and hope to continue to do. We, have had lots of ideas of how, we always want to see if we can expand our programs and make even more available to more people, and we are well on our way to being all set to do that here through this next year. It's been a wonderful beginning. So let me just remind you of 2 things that are coming up pretty soon within the next week. Essentially, 2 more events, because of course, as you know, we have lots of special events celebrating the different programs that we run through Signum and Mythgard over the course of the year. The next one is actually coming up on Friday afternoon Eastern Time at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So this means it's not going to be in the middle of the night for Europeans. And this is going to be one of our thesis chats. So this will be a sort of a talk and discussion, a sort of interview style discussion with Chris Swank, who is our first graduate ever, the first ever graduate of the Signum University Master's Program. And she's going to be talking about the work that she did on her master's degree thesis, which has since been published, and she's now enrolled in a PhD program, and you'll be able to hear about some of the work that she's been doing. And Chris is a wonderful illustration of sort of the Signum student, right? She's someone who is a really smart person who works in an academic environment, but was never sort of an established scholar herself, but really was interested in kind of taking that step. And she, through her work at Signum, she has now, she's now a regular conference presenter and has gotten a number of things published, and is as I said, she's now on to a PhD program. So her story is just, for me, a very wonderful kind of illustration of what we kind of set out to do. I've been delighted to sort of follow her career, and of course now we've lately hired her to teach on the Signum faculty. She's now one of our preceptors as well, which has been a lot of fun, and she's been doing great. She's precepting this semester. Dimitri Fimi's class, I believe, if I remember correctly. So anyway, that's been awesome. So be sure to tune in to hear Chris Swank talk about what she's done, and you can sort of hear a little bit more about what the Signum program has been accomplishing. And then on this coming Saturday, we have a very big event, which is the first session of our 3-part seminar on A Secret Vice, edited by Andrew Higgins, Dr. Andrew Higgins, I should say, and Dimitri Fimi. This is the first in our new seminar series, and I've explained this before, how, I know with the shift that we've made in our academic program, which has been so exciting in so many ways, with our new concentrations and the greater regularity and the offerings of our program. So for certificate students and master's degree students, our program has been very greatly enriched. But for people who just are wanting to audit and hoping for new courses every semester, there aren't going to be as many options available for them. And knowing this and not wanting to sort of deprive those students who have been such a vibrant part of our community for years past, we decided to launch this new series of seminars so that we could have more more of this kind of meaty study of Tolkien and other fantasy and science fiction literature, and not just with me. I mean, you guys hear from me a lot in the Mythgard Academy, but we wanted to be able to bring in eminent guest scholars to teach many of these seminars. So this first one, as I say, is on the very recently released book, A Secret Vice, which is, of course, a new edition of the essay, Tolkien's famous essay, A Secret Vice on Language Creation, and contains a great deal of very original research that Dimitri Fimi and Andrew Higgins did. A lot of discoveries that they made, and they really sort of paint some really interesting new parts of the picture of Tolkien's concept of languages and language development. There's a lot to be learned from that there, and they've done some wonderful work. So you'll be hearing from them. The first session is with Dr. Higgins, and that's going to be Sunday, October 9th at 4 p.m. Eastern. Of course, Dr. Higgins and Dr. Fimi are both in the UK, so these, again, will be at Europe-friendly times. So the first session is Sunday, October 9th at 4 p.m. Eastern. I hope you'll be able to join us for that. Now, we are with the... so hang on a second. I meant to give some links to make sure everybody had these. So let me do that before I forget. So this is the registration link. If you want to join, this is the registration link for Chris Swank's thesis talk on Friday, and this is the registration link for the Secret Vice seminar. If you haven't registered yet, everyone is welcome to register. So the other thing I wanted to explain, because with these new seminars, I am bringing in people, and I mean, if you know anything of the history of Signum University, one of the things that really matters a lot to me is being able to offer honorariums to people, to be the laborer is worthy of his hire, and that's something that that matters a lot to me on an academic level, to make sure that we're really showing I try not to just twist people's arms and make them do things for free. So we through the seminar series, we're going to be paying our guest lecturers. So we are asking we sort of have a suggested donation, like at the entrance to a free museum, a sort of a suggested donation. It's not required. It's open to everybody. I hope everyone will feel free to participate and to download it afterwards. The recordings will be available, just like the Mythgard Academy is. So the access is going to be the same as always. We have a suggested donation of $20 or $25 just to help us cover the costs of bringing in our guest lecturers. Our goal is to raise $2,500 for that seminar, and actually we have sort of a really exciting opportunity there, because a very, very generous anonymous donor has offered who's very excited about the seminar series, has offered to match 100%. If we make our $2,500, he'll match it 100% and give a $2,500 donation to help support Signum. So that's a very exciting prospect. So we're sort of hoping to hoping to reach that. If you want to make a donation to help to cover the seminar series, there's you can this is the event page for here, and you can see there's a link on that page to take you to the donation form to help support the Secret Advice Seminar. Many people already have. We've already raised, I think, about $800 or so towards the seminar, which is great. So we were off to a great start even before it's begun, which is really wonderful. So again, I hope you will feel free to participate, but if you are moved to help to support it, that would be awesome. And yeah, Tomas, great question. So everyone the donations that are made to support the seminar are still counted, within the overall Signum annual fund. It's all the money goes towards Signum and to help us to pay our expenses, and of course one of which with the seminars is our guest lecturers. Now, it does mean, Tomas, that any donation that's made, whether it be to the Secret Advice sort of channel or whether it be to the general fund, the same donor appreciation program applies to all. And we will sort of add all of those together. So if you gave a donation to the general fund, and then you also give a donation to the Secret Advice seminar, then we'll add those together, and the sort of the level of the donor appreciation program that you're in will be the sum of those. So yes, Tomas, if you donate $100 or more total to the annual fund, then yes, you get to be on the Council of the Wise and get to nominate the books that we that we'll be doing next in the Mythgard Academy, and all of our donors get voting rights. So you have the opportunity to help to vote on the next books that we do. Tom Hillman suggests, he says, don't be a propertarian, donate. Yeah, that's right, yeah. Show solidarity to Signum University. Absolutely. Very good. And I might as well, while we're at the link distribution stage, throw that out there too. That's our general donation link. Because I wouldn't want you to have to go hunting for that. All right, so that's where we are. Again, it's been very exciting. We're a third of the way to supporting the Secret Advice Seminar already. We're 40% or so through what we need for the annual fund for the year. So it's already been just a wonderful response from all of our supporters, and we're looking for your continued generosity, and certainly know that you guys have my gratitude. Well, let's dig back into the Dispossessed here. So we ended last time talking about Sabul, right? And there's that moment which, as I mentioned last time, I found to be a really fascinating moment in chapter 2 or 3, chapter 3, the second chapter in Urus, right? When he's having that conversation with the other physicists, and we've seen, we looked at this last time. We saw, several moments where they're clearly like speaking at cross purposes or just not really understanding each other because they don't really have the framework, because they make completely sort of wrong assumptions. You can see just their minds are kind of oriented in totally different ways. As for instance, the Urasti just can't envision the idea that they don't have a government or laws, right? It's just they can't parse that in their heads, and we can see other things that Shevek can't parse either, right? But then there's that really fascinating moment where Sabul comes up, and Shevek's relationship with Sabul comes up, and of course we've not seen it yet at that point, right? So we've had chapter 1, which is the one where he takes off in the rocket and talks with the doctor. We've had chapter 2, which was his early childhood, both the time when he was a baby and at the time when he gets kicked out of the speaking and listening group, and the time that he locks his friend in the prison, right? So that's chapter 2. Chapter 3 then is this time in Urus when he's first there and talking with the physicists, and we see him kind of finding his way in Urus. And then chapter 4 is when we finally get to meet Sabul, and we see the beginning of his academic career. Now, so before we've actually seen it, we get these references to Sabul, and the Urasti, think or assume that they can totally read between the lines here, right? And they say that, they're like, oh, you say no more. We totally understand the situation there, right? It's obvious he's envious. He's been trying to take credit for your work, and it's a and they even say, it's Jafolisk, I think, who says you don't have to pretend, right? We know how people. I mean, you guys all claim to be different up there, but people are people, and we know how it is, right? And at the time, in chapter 3, it sounds like just yet another one of those things, because they make very similar statements about the government, right? But we have already seen that no, they seem actually to be wrong about that, right? That seems to be an example of, an archaic society which just really can't comprehend an anarchical society and how it could possibly work. So when they talk that way about Sabal, it sounds like it's the same thing, right? That like the kind of solidarity and brotherhood that exists on Anaris is just, they can't parse it any more than they can than they can wrap their minds around the idea of women physicists, right? Because again, we have so many examples of that it seems yet another. And yet, as we were already beginning to see in the passages we were looking at last time, the uncomfortable truth seems to be that the Urasti physicists were spot on in their analysis of Sabal. Kind of surprisingly or unexpectedly, it does not in fact fit that pattern. So you remember at the end of last time we were talking about the Eotic dynamite physics books, right? And those physics books in Eotic that Sabal gives to Shevek the first time they meet, and he tells him to learn Eotic because he's got to be able to read Eotic so he can read the work of Eotic physicists, and that they're going to be communicating with the Eotic physicists. And Sabal suggests, and so you'll remember the sort of shocking suggestion that Sabal makes, that they not reveal, that like he conceal it, right? Don't tell anybody. Don't let anybody else read the books. Don't tell anybody else that you're reading these books, right? That you're learning Eotic. It's supposed to be a secret. And that idea of like keeping a secret from other people, of concealing something from anyone, right, from the people around him, is a deeply strange, a very counterintuitive idea for Shevek, right? And we saw that last time in the metaphor that Sabal made in order to try to illustrate or try to justify, really, his injunction for secrecy. The metaphor that he makes is that they're like dynamite, right? That no, it's not appropriate to share everything. If you had a bunch of explosive caps, right, and you shared them with every kid on the street, they'd blow themselves up, right? His implication there would seem to be that thinking of the good of society, of the good of everybody, thinking in solidarity with everybody, doesn't necessarily mean distributing everything, right? That it's going to do harm if you Arthur Harris says, mind-blasting caps, thinking of baby Shevek egoizing about the sun. Yeah, exactly, something like that. So it's for the public good, right? It's for the public good because that stuff is dynamite. The Eotic books are dynamite, right? And that idea, it's like, okay, maybe we can kind of get behind that. Maybe we can buy that. But it's really uncomfortable in a couple ways, right? On the one hand, it's uncomfortable because it's not explosive. What makes it explosive, right? What makes it explosive? It's first of all, they're physics textbooks that most anybody can't understand, right? As the narrator says, Shevek finds when he's reading the book, when he's learning to read the book that Sabal gave him, that it's not basic introductory physics, right? So even if it were written in Pravik, most of the people who might find it on the street wouldn't understand it. Of course, we talked last time about how it's not exactly so much, the issue isn't exactly the physics, right? It's not the physics that's explosive. It's the language, it's the Eotic that's explosive. But remember, that brings us right back to the conversation, to the argument that that Shevek was having with Tyrion at the end of chapter 2. right? When Tyrion was suggesting that they, the PDC, the Enaresti in general, were wrong, that they were basically trying to prevent Enaresti from learning about Urus. And his argument was because they're afraid. They want the Enaresti to distrust, to just simply blindly distrust and hate Urus and the Urasti, right? Blindly without information, because the only information that is disseminated about Urus is very out of date and highly prejudicial, right? What is Urus really like? Nobody on Anaris really knows, right? And so why, Tyrion was asking, do they want us to hate them? Why do they want us to hate it? Why are they trying to instill hatred in the Enaresti towards Urus? So he was suggesting something like a conspiracy, right? Something like a conspiracy that was working through the educational system in Anaris, and Shevek was violently opposed to this idea, right? And you may remember his very, very strong arguments, and we looked at some of those last time as well. Some of his very strong arguments against that, right? That's not how it is. And yet, even in the best possible interpretation, right? Even if we completely trust what Szabó says here, his argument boils down to the same thing. It would be dangerous to let other people learn Eotic, right? The common person, people on the street are like children, right? You wouldn't just give dynamite to a child, right? To every kid that you met on the street. And so that's a metaphor, that's an illustration that he's making for giving these Eotic books or showing these Eotic books to people, right? So dynamite is to children as the Eotic language is to the average Enaresti citizen. Even if we totally trust what Szabó says, that's a startling claim, right? In what way? Why is ignorance of Eotic necessary? Why is ignorance of Eotic for the public good? What is the danger to people? How's it going to blow up in their faces, right, if they learn Eotic? So that's troubling, right? Especially knowing how firmly Shevek himself opposed the idea that was even a thing, right? And now he's seeing something which sounds kind of startlingly like it, coming from someone who is in a position of power, though Shevek wouldn't think of it that way exactly, right? At least not initially. But wait, it's worse, right? We have the suspicion, at least I have the suspicion, that Szabó is not, in fact, being completely forthright about that. Is Szabó's motivation for telling Shevek not to show the books to anybody else simply his desire to protect people, right? Again, that would be kind of alarming enough, even if true. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true at all. So what is going on then? If we read between the lines with what Szabó is saying, what do we see there? What is to be read there? Well, it kind of sounds like a cover-up, right? It kind of, that is to say, like, don't show anybody because we're not supposed to be doing this, right? But what does that mean in this society, right? I mean, it's not like this is against the rules, but shh, it'll be our little secret, right? I mean, is that what we're supposed to be reading between the lines there? Well, obviously, no. There's no rules, right? There's no rules, so no rules to be broken. So it's not exactly like we don't have permission to do this and we're doing it behind the backs of the powers that be. That's not how the Enaresti society works. So what does that mean then? Well, it seems to me that doesn't make the situation better. It makes the situation worse, right? To be, passing dynamite around among potential revolutionaries under the nose of, but behind the back of, a potentially unjust governing conspiracy would be kind of noble, potentially, right? Revolution is at the core of Odonianism, right? So that would be fine, in a sense, if that, in fact, were what was going on. But that's not what's going on, right? That's not what's going on at all. So what is going on then? How are we supposed to read it? Well, it seems to be... Michael says he's been plagiarizing their work and doesn't want people to know. That's true, Michael, though I don't think that can be Sabel's primary motivation, for the primary reason that, I mean, who's he afraid is going to read it? No one's going to understand it. Again, it's not like people are going to be like, oh, now I see through Sabel's theories. Nobody even understands Sabel's theories, right? There are very few people who even understand that or will have read his books or know, right? So I don't think that's... I doubt that can be his motivation. In fact, if anything, Michael, you'd think if he were really activated by the desire to conceal the fact that he's been plagiarizing the idiotic physicists all these years, it's Shevik he would want to prevent from reading it, right? Because Shevik is, the person who is giving the books is the one person who is most in the position, most readily in the position to perceive what he's doing and potentially to expose it. So I can't imagine that is the primary motivation for what he's doing, though potentially it factors into it. Carita says, is Sabel being a small sort of person who likes controlling people? Is that what we're supposed to see? And Carita, Carita, you say that you think that seems sort of simplistic, but actually it's really profound in the Anoresti context, right? A small sort of person who likes to boost their own sense of power by exerting that, by manipulating other people, and by exercising the control that they have, that their position permits them over, other people who are subject to their authority in their particular sphere, right? That's an ugly thing, but it's not shocking to us, right? In fact, that's kind of my definition of a bureaucrat. Like, when bureaucracy goes bad, that's what it is, right? It's about power. At least this is my own theory, my own perception of it anyway. When somebody who has the power over, like the clerk behind the desk at the DMV has power over you, right? Because you need your driver's license renewed, or you need to get your driver's license from that state, and they have the power to make your life difficult or even to deny it to you, right? So they have power over you, and there are some persons who in that position enjoy exerting the power that they have over other people, and small people who enjoy making themselves feel bigger at the expense of others, right? But so on the one hand, as you say, Carita, that seems like a really simple thing, even kind of a small thing, right? I mean, like, okay, that's annoying, but at the end of the day, it's kind of sad, right? But think what a fundamental violation that is of the Odonian principles that Shevik himself believes in so strongly, right? That whole concept, it's an alien concept. It's not just distasteful. It's not just wrong. It's alien to Shevik. He doesn't think that way. Kay is thinking of academic administration. This shaft which strikes home, Kay, absolutely. Certainly jives with my own experience with academic administration. One of the things I try to remind myself of when I look in the mirror and remind myself that I'm an administrator now. But yes, absolutely. That's we've all encountered that again. But it's sort of an understood part of what goes on. That kind of use of power over somebody else is normal, right? It's normal, not admirable, right? And it's not, and even in some sense not defensible, but it's not weird. To Shevik, it's deeply weird, right? There's a fundamental breach. Sabel is guilty of a fundamental breach in solidarity and is basically co-opting Shevik into that same pattern, right? Now, think about the very first thing that he learns about Sabo. We get the red flag about Sabo, right? And exactly this red flag when Mitis, his earlier physics teacher, right, who is sending him on to Sabo, says that really counterintuitive thing about him. Says, if you go to Sabo, you will be his man. And that phrase, that possessive pronoun, as we've seen, and I think we've talked about this before in Breivik, the very language, the very construction of the language is hostile to that kind of expression. People don't use possessive pronouns that way. As the narrator explains, like you would not talk about, your father or your mother. You talk about the father and the mother. That's how Breivik is structured, right? That possession, that possessiveness, it's egoizing, right? It's fundamentally counter to the Odonian philosophy, to the NRSD culture. So when Mitis says you will be his man, that sends up the flag, right? Okay, that Sabo is different and countercultural in some ways, and we can see it right away from that first interaction. Well, let's carry on then looking at Sabo and what we can see from him. This is when Shevek brings him his book, or rather when he produces, that is, brings out the book, right, that Shevek has made and that he has published without Shevek's knowledge. Shevek looked down at the book he still held, then out the window. He felt and looked rather ill. He also looked tense, but with Sabo he had never been shy or awkward, as he often was with people whom he would have liked to know. I didn't know you were translating it, he said. Translated it, edited it, polished some of the rougher spots, filled in transitions you'd left out, and so forth. A couple of decades' work. You should be proud of it. Your ideas, to a large extent, form the groundwork of the finished book. It consisted entirely of Shevek's and Atrov's ideas. Yes, Shevek said. He looked down at his hands. Presently, he said, I'd like to publish the paper I wrote this quarter on reversibility. It ought to go to Atrov. It would interest him. He's still hung up on causation. Publish it? Where? In Eotic, I meant, on Urus. Send it to Atrov, like this last one, and he'll put it in one of the journals there. You can't give them a work to publish that hasn't been printed here. Okay, what do we see here? Yeah, Karita, the to a large extent. Yeah, those are the deadly words, right? Let's just gloss those for a second, right? Your ideas, to a large extent, form the groundwork of the finished book. I mean, you could even extend it, form the groundwork, right? What do we see here? Well, just, Karita, starting with that passage that you pointed to, as Shevek can immediately see, there is fundamental dishonesty here. And again, that's a thing which is shocking in this culture, right? Remember, it was the lie to the work crew foreman which first triggered Shevek's shame at the prison experiment, right? Because lying to somebody is an exertion of power over them, right? And we talked about this some at the time when we were looking at that. Here's Sabo, on the one hand, just lying to him, right? He's being dishonest. Shevek's ideas don't form the groundwork to the work, nor to a large extent, right? As the narrator immediately says, this book is entirely Shevek and Atrov's ideas. Sabo has nothing to do with it. He's translated it into Eotic, that's it, right? And yet here's Sabo taking credit for this, pretending he's collaborated even with Shevek on this, right? So yeah, that by itself, even before we consider anything else, that dishonesty, and again, it's not just the dishonesty. He is implicitly asking Shevek to enter into this dishonesty with him, right? He's asking Shevek to go along with the dishonest claim that he's making. Because, of course, Shevek could choose to say, and to tell everybody, no, this is my book entirely. Szabó took credit for it, and he lies. He could do that, in theory, right? Szabó's words here are an open invitation for Shevek to go along with what he's asked. Nancy is wondering if, with the use of the word groundwork and stuff, Nancy's wondering if Szabó has talked himself into believing that he wrote this himself. Nancy, I don't know. And of course, it's one of the things, I don't know that that's necessarily totally different from what we were already talking about, right? I mean, that's the thing about these kinds of lies, about this kind of deception, is, of course, there's always the chance that you might end up believing your own story yourself, Nancy, right? And then that's kind of, in a way, like you could say, well, it would be better, right? Kind of, actually, maybe not, right? With sort of the sort of profundity of the dishonesty that he has sort of wrapped himself up in there. Now, but that's not it, right? It's not just that. It's the immediate reaction that Szabó has to Shevek's ideas about publishing his article on reversibility, right? What do we see there? How are those two things related? What is the relationship between Szabó's negative reaction to Shevek's desire to publish an article in Iadic and his dishonesty about the book, which he's had translated into Iadic? How are those two things related? Are they part of the same thing? Do we see, how do we understand those two things going together? While you're thinking about that and typing answers to that, I have another simpler question. Okay, can you hear me now? All right, excellent. How about that? Well, that's exciting. Okay. Okay, well, I know what happened. No, it wasn't just you. Yeah, several of you were like, oh no, is something wrong with my connection? No, apparently mine. That was an Adobe issue, a Flash issue. No idea why that happened. Gonna look into that one. Okay, all right. Nargles, Karita, yeah, probably the Nargles. I'm sure that seems likely. Okay. Jennifer Miner says, in the chat room we're taking credit, and how that works since it seems propertarian. Yeah, it's true. It's true. Okay, all right, sorry. So we were talking about Szabó, right? And I had asked the question about Shevek. Okay, I was talking about Shevek. Why did Shevek want to? Right? Did you get that as far as my asking that question? Right? What is it? What is the reason exactly that Shevek is wanting to send his article? And again, Oh, Karita says it was okay. Thank you, Karita, for telling me where it cut off. I left off it. I'll leave you to think about that. But now, okay. I'll leave you to think about that. But now, okay. That was when I asked my follow-up question, and my follow-up question was, why does Shevek do this? What's Shevek's motivation for wanting to send his article to Atro, right? For wanting to publish his article in Iadic. And the answer to that, of course, the answer to all questions like this about the text are there, right? That is the first thing. Whenever I ask a question, the very first thing I want you to do is not to like look up and think, right? I don't want you to be like, well, no, I want you to look down, right, at the text and see what it says, right? That's always the first place to start. Then you kind of put things together, but you got to start with the observations. No, exactly. He wants to share, right? What he says is, it ought to go to Atro. It would interest him, right? That is, his desire is to communicate, and he wants to communicate for Atro's benefit. Atro needs to learn this, right? And so since Atro's own line of thinking would be benefited by what Shevek has said, at least in Shevik's opinion, that's what would happen, right? He therefore wants to send it. So it's not, Shevek does not seem to be egoizing here, right? He's not thinking about his fame on Urus or anything like that. He's exchanging ideas with peers, and we've already learned how fruitful that has been in Shevik's own career, right? How much this has been, how much his own thoughts have been stimulated by the exchange back and forth with the Iari physicists. So, but what's Sable's reaction? And to say this another way, what does Sable's reaction betray? See what I mean? Yeah, good. As Mark Ingram points out, Shevek will also be able to learn more from Atro after Atro has more of Shevik's ideas. So it's not like it's not altruistic, right? You'll remember altruism is against Odonianism, right? That even the idea of altruism is contrary to the Odonian philosophy, because altruism suggests I have something, right, to give to you, and I will do something for your benefit. I am your benefactor, right? You become somebody's patron or benefactor when you show altruism to them, according to the Odonian philosophy, and so they reject that idea. So it's not altruistic in that way. Yeah, good. Noam says Shevek wants to share with Urus. Sabo is in competition with them. Yeah, that seems right. He says we can't publish it there until we publish it here, right? That can't be done. That can't be done, right? It's like Anaris first. Even though Shevek immediately points out that doesn't make any sense. A, because you just published the book there, right, before it was published here. And secondly, like, nobody here can understand it. That's kind of the problem, right? So what exactly, as Jennifer Miner says, it was just done. Exactly. Well, let's look at more things, and let's endeavor to get through, at least a good 5 slides. Because it's bigger than just Sabo, right? Shevek continues, but that's what we did with this one. All this except my rebuttal came out in the IAN review. By the way, funny story. So I still don't know how to pronounce that. Aeun? I don't know. But when listening to the audiobook version of it, I totally thought that was a series of letters. I thought it was like A-U-N or something, like the letters A, U, and N. I thought it was an acronym for something. Anyway, sorry. Okay, sorry. All this except my rebuttal came out in the IUN review before this came out here. I couldn't prevent that. But why do you think I hurried this into print? You don't think everybody in PDC approves of our trading ideas with Urus like this, do you? Defense insists that every word that leaves here on those freighters be passed by a PDC-approved expert. And on top of that, do you think all the provincial physicists who don't get in on this pipeline to Urus don't begrudge our using it? Think they aren't envious? There are people lying in wait for us to make a false step. If we're ever caught doing it, we'll lose that mail slot on the Erasti freighters. You see the picture now? So, do you see the picture now? What is the picture? What is the picture that emerges from Sable's words here? Yeah. At the same time, Michael says he's being very proprietarian, and Mark Ingram says, "Mine mail slot." Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah. The perspective that he is suggesting, if he's right, if Sabo is right about this, that's really shocking, right? Yeah, Tom Hillman is suggesting it sort of seems like some animals are more equal than others. Yeah, thinking of Orwell's uh, um, the animal story, Animal Farm. That's it. I was losing the noun. Animal, not Animal House. That's a different thing. Yeah, Animal Farm. That's the thing. Yeah, exactly. Um, if Sabo is right, then there is this underlayer, like all these things that Shevik has refused to accept about Anarasti society are actually true, right? If all of these things exactly, Mark, the competition not just between Sabo and the Irasti physicists, but between him and the provincial physicists, right? Um, that I mean, like, let's just go through and count the shocking things that he says, right? Um, you don't think everybody in PDC approves of our trading ideas with Urus like this, do you? Like, approves? Seriously? Think how violently Shevik responded against the idea that there was anybody to approve of anything, right? Even after this, in his conversation with Badap, after he and Badap get back together, he's still appalled at the idea that, he says that, he's talking to Badap and saying, you keep talking about they are doing these things, who are they, he says, right? If Sabel's right, there is a they, right? And the PDC is, in fact, in the business of governing, right? Of approving or disapproving of things and preventing people from doing things. And again, this doesn't seem that strange, except when we put ourselves into the Odonian perspective, because Shevik does seem to believe very wholeheartedly in the Odonian principles. And through, with Shevik as our protagonist, we have become already by this point of the book, to some extent, acculturated within the Anarasti principles, right? And so this is an alarming reversal of everything that he has believed and everything that he has continually asserted in defense of Anarasti culture. The idea that anybody is in a position to approve or disapprove of anybody, and to enforce that approval or disapproval is shocking. That it's the PDC, that the PDC actually does operate as a government. So you see the implication of this, right? We've seen already that when the Urasti physicists said to Shevik in chapter 3, oh yeah, we totally get the whole Sabo thing, right? You don't even have to explain it. It seems like they don't get it, but in fact it turns out they do. What if it's the same thing about the government, right? They don't seem to understand about the government and how there's no real government. But what if they're right about that too? It kind of sounds almost like maybe they are, right? Defense insists that every word that leaves here on those freighters be passed by a PDC-approved expert. Sabo, fortunately, is the PDC-approved expert, right? Do you think they don't begrudge our using it? Begrudge? Why would they begrudge? What is the motivation for begrudging? They begrudge them their opportunity because they, Sabo and his people, possessive pronoun intended, aren't sharing, in which case they're right not to begrudge, but to resent the lack of sharing that Sabo is doing. Yeah, Sabo is absolutely, as you guys are saying, he's being very, very proprietarian about that slot, right? As you guys were saying before. But envy, I think they aren't envious, and that too is a shocking idea. Envy is a fundamentally proprietarian concept, right? Only if one person possesses a thing which somebody else doesn't possess. That's the only circumstances under which envy is possible, right? Yeah, Nancy's amazed that there's even a word for envy. Yeah. Noam says this is the first time that there's a limited resource that can't or won't be shared across the whole society. And Noam, remember, we got a little glimpse. Remember Shevik's discomfort with dessert served in the refectory, right, at the Institute, they're getting special treatment. Dessert supplies are not being shared equally among everybody on Anaris, and that makes them uncomfortable. And this is far worse than that, right? Here again, we come back to Sabo, the Eotic books, and the dynamite, right? And now it becomes more clear than ever what he was wanting to do is to protect his ownership of the mail slot, right? His power over that. Neil Ottenstein asks very appropriately, who else wants to communicate with Urus? Great question, right? I don't know, but it seems like at least he thinks they do. Now, Neil, it is entirely possible, right? And somebody else, who was it a little bit earlier on? Good, Rachel, yeah. Rachel Draper had said that Sabo assumes that everybody else has the same motives as himself. And I agree with you, Rachel. It's possible that he's wrong, right? So, Neil, if you're suggesting that maybe, like, the provincial physicists aren't really, like, pining away to be communicating with Urus and that Sabo's wrong about that, maybe so, right? As Rachel's suggesting, perhaps he's just projecting, right? Maybe he's just saying, hey, this is how I would feel if I were them, right? So I assume this is how they are. Maybe so. If that's the case, that would be good, I guess, because it might if that were the case, that would be evidence that the situation that we have here is just Sabo being a really bad egg, and not that Sabo is in fact revealing this dark underside of his whole society, right? But that's the question that comes up. And I mean, again, exactly as somebody was just asking, Noam was just asking this, who has a better read on reality, Sabo or Shevik? That, I think, is one of the questions that we have to come out of this with, right? I mean, it's clear that Sabo is in great deviation from Odonian principles. Perfectly obvious, right? But is he just twisted, or is Shevik naive, right? We don't have any clear evidence which one of those is really the case. Karita suggests perhaps both. In a sense, perhaps both could be true. Tom Hillman thinks that Sabo has a better read on human nature. Well, and Tom, but remember, that's exactly how the Urasti were talking, right? People are people, right? And think of Shifoilisk's little barb about idealists, up on the moon, right? Yeah, I mean, there's the ideals of Odonianism, and then there's human nature, right? Yeah. And so Noam says that Shevik is definitely naive, though Sabo might still be wrong. Certainly true. Let's keep going. If you think you know what you're doing better than I do, then submit that paper to the press. You don't need permission. This isn't some kind of hierarchy, I can't stop you. All I can do is give you my advice. You're the press syndicate's consultant on manuscript and physics, Shevik said. I thought I'd save time for everyone by asking you now. His gentleness was uncompromising. Because he would not compete for dominance, he was indomitable. Save time, what do you mean? Sabo growled, but Sabo was also an Odonian. He writhed, as if physically tormented by his own hypocrisy, turned away from Shevik, turned back to him, and said spitefully, his voice thick with anger, Go ahead, submit the damned thing. I'll declare myself incompetent to give counsel on it. I'll tell them to consult Gavarib. She's the simultaneity expert, not I, the mystical Gagaist. The universe has a giant harp string oscillating in and out of existence. What note does it play, by the way? Passages from the numerical harmonies, I suppose? The fact is that I am incompetent, in other words, unwilling, to counsel PDC or the press on intellectual excrement. Tom Hillman says, being right about human nature doesn't mean one is doing right by using that as an excuse for selfishness, whether on the planet or on the moon. Absolutely. But even, absolutely, if you're using that as an excuse, that's obviously a moral dodge, right? The question is it true, right? The glimpses that were given of Anoresti society in chapter 2 and 3, on the one hand, are meant to suggest things are just different there, right? Many of the things that we absolutely take for granted, like ownership of private property, even the things which are our natural impulses, which we would call human nature and they would call proprietarian, right? Things which are, I think, for instance, about the conversation the boys were having about prisons before they started their experiment, right? How they couldn't even comprehend the idea of like one person using force on another to compel them to do something they really didn't want to do, right? It does suggest that there is a fundamental shift in their view of the world, right? The question is, are the Orasti physicists right when they say people are people, right? You can't change human nature. Can't you? Isn't that kind of what the whole Odonian experiment was about? Isn't that why they left Mars? Isn't why that wall exists? Isn't that what like they've quarantined themselves or the rest of the world away from them, depending on which side of the wall you're standing on, right? Isn't that the point of the wall, right? Isn't that the infection that would spread from Uras, right? If everybody knew more about Uras and knew Eotic. Yeah, exactly. Tom was just typing that same thing. If you've changed human nature, you don't need a wall. And that's Tyrion's argument, right, Tom? That's Tyrion's argument. Look, if we are as superior as we say we are, and we believe in our principles, we should share them, right? We should share them. Why should we be afraid? Why should we hate? Yeah. Kay, I confess I was thinking the same thing. Kay Ben Abraham was noting that him being indomitable because he was not competing for dominance was reminding her strongly of the men of Rohan do not lie, and therefore they are not easily deceived. Yeah, Kay, I was totally thinking the same thing in that moment. But Noam, you're absolutely right. There is an admission of hierarchy by Shevek. And I think, Noam, you're pointing to the critical thing here. It's not just that we, the readers, are seeing that Sabel is betraying the existence of a hierarchy, right? That hierarchy really does, in fact, exist. Shevek is acknowledging a hierarchy. And that is a major step on his part, right? And I think that's does it mean that he is accepting the fact that things don't work this way? You know, the way that like things don't match up to the Odonian ideals, that his society isn't what he thought it was? I mean, as one of you were saying a little bit earlier on, Karita was saying, Sabel is just sort of casually saying that your whole life is a lie earlier on, right? When he was kind of striking at the very underpinning of Shevek's ideas of Anoresti society. Shevek acknowledging the hierarchy here doesn't necessarily mean that he accepts that, right? It does show that he gets Sabel's hypocrisy, right? That he understands that. That he sees that Sabel is an aberration, right? What is Sabel so upset about here? Why does Sabel get so mad? You see how the narrator prompts us there? What we're prompted to look at? How we're prompted to understand Sabel? Yeah, Neil, Sabel does seem to be aware of a certain threat. I mean, Shevek does pose a threat to him in some ways. he could be exposed in some way. Yeah, he is. Michael was saying that he's threatened too. But look now, in that last paragraph, what does the narrator emphasize? To what does the narrator draw our attention? Yes, no, the hypocrisy, right? Exactly. And Nancy, he is his own awareness of his own hypocrisy, his own sensitivity to his own hypocrisy. Sabo is not so far gone as a propertarian that he does not perceive that he is being a propertarian, right? He knows. Kay Ben Abraham says he's spiteful and angry because he's losing this battle, which is certainly true. But yes, he is aware of the fact that he's being a hypocrite, right? He is, as the narrator says, he too is an Odonian, right? So what Sabo is saying is countercultural, and he knows that it's countercultural. And so what does he do? What's his response? Is there something? We've seen something like this before, right? Almost everything that happens in this book is directly paralleled by at least one other moment, right? In all of these different chapters and stories that are being juxtaposed together. This reminds me, good, Neil, you've got it exactly. Shame. He seems to feel shame for what he's doing, like the shame that Shevek himself felt when during the prison experiment, right? When they had imprisoned their friend. That moment when Shevek's like they're play acting, right? Tyrion very explicitly is play acting. He's play acting being the master, the proprietarian warden, right? The one who owns somebody else and can make them do whatever they want to do. Tyrion, is very openly adopting a role, right? It's not him, it's not what he believes, but it's the role that he has accepted. Okay. Shevek feels shame, and the moment at which he feels shame is the moment in which he can't avoid the knowledge that how he's acting, what he's taking pleasure in, is something, even if it's a joke, right? Even if it's just even if they're just playing, even if he's just acting, it is still just so fundamentally contrary to all of his principles that he can't handle it anymore, right? So he feels shame. Sabo does seem to feel that same shame, and in this moment, the position Shevek has exposed his own hypocrisy, right? Shevek has made it clear that Sabo can try to hide behind Odonianism. You don't need permission, right? Nobody can tell you whether you can or can't, right? And Shevek points out, like, oh, but we both know that I do need permission. I need your permission. If you don't permit me, it won't happen. And he can't hide it anymore. So how does he respond? Right? Shevek responded to his sense of shame by cutting it off, right? That he had to bring the whole prison thing to an end right away. Sabo responds. Kate Neville says he responds by lashing out, by calling Gvarab's theories excrement. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Kate is paralleling it to Shevek's impulse to beat up Shevek. That's interesting, Kate. I'll come back to that in a second. I wasn't thinking of Shevet here, who beat Shevek up, but yeah, I can see the parallel there. That's interesting. What do we see behind these accusations? What's the oh yeah, Arthur, the Gagaist thing. No, of course it has nothing to do with Lady Gaga. I'm not sure I can provide a good definition of that word. It's a artistic movement. or am I confusing it with Dadaism, which is a different thing? Yeah, I'm not confident I can define it for you, Arthur, but it's certainly it's a concept that goes back a ways. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, if anyone has anything illuminating to say about Gagaism, feel free to share, and I will in turn share it. He calls Gvarab's theories and Shevik's theories, of course, excrement, right? But why? What does this show? What does this reflect? And notice what he keeps coming back to, right? What's the word that he repeats? Incompetent. I'll say I'm incompetent, because I am incompetent, right? In other words, unwilling. You see there? So it's envy, right? He doesn't understand Gvarab's theories. He keeps saying, I'll say I'm incompetent. He defines incompetent in this case as unwilling, right? I'll say I'm incompetent, in other words, unwilling. He doesn't want to admit that he doesn't get it, that he doesn't understand, that he can't follow Gvarab and Shevek, and he doesn't see the significance of it. But he doesn't want to admit that, because that would be him losing his position. Okay, Arthur. Yeah, thank you. Here I will. Yeah, flash attack again, Neil. I'm telling you, boy, this better not become a patch. So remember that we're still testing this thing out, right? If this becomes a pattern, that is pretty bad. But I'm back. Okay, all right. So I see envy, as I was saying, in Sabel's words here, and I think that that's I think that seems pretty clear. His dismissiveness of Gvarab and his dismissiveness of the simultaneity stuff seems to be fairly clearly fueled by envy. And his own words talking about people being envious before really seems to suggest it, right? Okay, let's keep going. Here's Shevik's line of thought about this situation and what he should do and where he is, right? As Midas had predicted, he was Sabel's man. Sabel had ceased to be a functioning physicist years ago. His high reputation was built on expropriations from other minds. Shevik was to do the thinking, and Sabel would take the credit. Obviously an ethically intolerable situation, which Shevik would denounce and relinquish. Only he would not. He needed Sabel. He wanted to publish what he wrote, and to send it to the men who could understand it, the Urasti physicists. He needed their ideas, their criticism, their collaboration. So they had bargained, he and Sabel, bargained like profiteers. It had not been a battle, but a sale. You give me this, and I'll give you that. Refuse me, and I'll refuse you. Sold? Sold! Shevik's career, like the existence of his society, depended on the continuance of a fundamental, unadmitted profit contract. Not a relationship of mutual aid and solidarity, but an exploitative relationship. Not organic, but mechanical. Can true function arise from basic dysfunction? Yeah. Yeah, Kay Ben Abraham says this is the highest test of true Odonianism. Can you own your ideas? Right? If you're entirely unproprietarian, all that should matter is the ideas themselves, not who had them. Kay, exactly. That's where I think the real rub in this situation is. Right? It's bad enough that Sabel is openly, at least to Shevek, openly proprietarian and pressing him into this exploitative relationship, right? But Shevek, in order to get what he wants, which is to be able to continue to pursue his work, right, has to bargain with him, has to meet him on proper, rather than denouncing his proprietarianism, has to meet him on proprietarian grounds. But wait, Kay, as you suggest, there's more to it than that, though, right? It's not merely that in going along with Sabo, he is becoming complicit in this proprietarian model. The position that Shevek is placed in is deeply challenging on that other level, that level of the control of ideas, the ownership of ideas, right? Because you're absolutely right, Kay. It would seem the pure Odonian response would be to say, what does it matter, right? There's almost a challenge to that. It's almost as if Sabo is daring him, because it's easy to see, right? If Shevek protests, if Shevek were to come out and say, Sabo is taking credit for my ideas, what would everybody say? Obviously, there's a clear thing everybody would say if he went out there and said, but those are my ideas, not his. Stop egoizing, Neil. That's exactly what they would say. Stop egoizing. Yeah, it's not about you. It's not about your ideas. James Stevens is surprised they even put names on books. James, somebody mentioned this earlier on, and I think it's exactly, I think it does make sense. How do you greet somebody on Urus? On Anaris? How do you greet somebody? How does it work? You've just met somebody new. What do you do? What does a good NRST do? Jennifer, yeah, you give them your name, right? The first thing you say, good, Brian says the same thing. The first thing you say is your own name. So he meets somebody and he says, Shevek, right? To identify himself, to say who he is, right? There's a way in which the putting of names on books sounds to me kind of like that, right? If you're sharing, like the idea of like whom you're sharing with doesn't seem like it must necessarily be intrinsically proprietarian. To know that you are sharing the ideas of Shevek. Now, there's always a trap there, like a moral trap, right? If you're being given credit, if you're being credited for your ideas, then there's a chance that you'll consider them your ideas, right? That you will indeed have an egoizing and proprietarian view of them, and of your accomplishment, and of your book, right? All of those things. But nevertheless, I don't think one would have to say it shows a fundamental flaw in Odonian principles to put names on books in the first place, any more than it's egoizing to identify yourself when you meet somebody, right? You're just letting the other person know whom they're talking to. In a sense, of course, to conceal your identity is almost, in a sense, to sort of preserve power over somebody else. I think that's, to me, that could sort of work, I think. Yeah, Brian Dimmick says putting names on books is only proprietarian if books are property and not freely shared. That's certainly true. Yeah, Good Kate says, otherwise, how would the other person know to whom to address critiques or suggestions? Exactly. I mean, it seems like the relationship that Atro and Shevek have is the thing that you would want to do, like the reason why you would put a name on a book, right? Because it facilitates the back and forth of ideas between people, not just pretending that these ideas are kind of out there, right? So yeah, that all kind of makes sense to me. But again, here's the crucial thing. As I said, if he protests, he's egoizing, right? This is the particularly insidious nature of this particular trap, right? Sobel is not only himself acting in a proprietarian fashion, he's doing a thing that you can't, Shevek, would be, an Odonian even to object to. It's a really complicated situation. Shevek's hard on himself here. He's like, see, look, here I am being a proprietarian, striking a bargain with Sobel, right? But of course, Sobel himself necessitates that. Shevek is saying he believes that he did what he had to do in order to get his work done, right? He is being a physicist that's how he can best benefit. It's his greatest gift, right? It's how he can benefit. Not that they would use the word gift. That suggests ownership, right? But anyway, it's how he can best function within the society, how he can most benefit the society as a whole. And in order to do that work, he has to be able to do that work, right? But this is why he's asking at the very end there, can true function arise from basic dysfunction? He's having a means and ends problem, right? His end is good, right? Is Odonian, but his means are not Odonian. And would that work? Could that work? Yes, Kay. Oh, exactly. I hadn't thought of that, but you're exactly right. Kay has nailed this. It's just like in the nursery. The other kid shoves Shevek out of the sun, but Shevek gets chastised for crying about it. Yes, exactly. We have a little model there of Sobel and Shevek, right? And yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly. It's a brilliant perception there, Kay. Yeah. More. This, as I mentioned at the end of class last time, this was sort of the image that I was ultimately aiming at over the course of the last class, because it seems to me so suggestive of the whole situation. This is on Urus, of course. As the car followed the riverside highway toward the turnoff to Ayu Eun, it passed a bluff on the curve of the river Sais, and up on the bluff there was a building, heavy, ruinous, implacable, with broken towers of black stone. Nothing could have been less like the gorgeous, light-hearted buildings of the Space Research Foundation, the showy domes, the bright factories, the tidy lawns and paths. Nothing could have made them look so much like bits of colored paper. That, I believe, is the fort, Chefoilis remarked with his usual satisfaction at placing the tactless remark where it was least wanted. Gone all to ruins, Pei said. Must be empty. Want to stop and have a look at it, Shevek? Chefoilis asked, ready to tap on the chauffeur's screen. No, Shevek said. He had seen what he wanted to see. There was still a fort in Drio. He did not need to enter it and seek down ruined halls for the cell in which Odo had spent 9 years. He knew what a prison cell was like. He looked up, his face still set and cold, at the ponderous dark walls that now loomed almost above the car. I have been here for a long time, the fort said, and I am still here. Jennifer, no, of course she doesn't know what it's like to be a prisoner, exactly, literally, but Jennifer, I would actually nominate that sentence as one of those moments in the book which encapsulates just a huge portion of this entire book, right? He knew what a prison cell was like. That's huge. It's huge, right? And of course, it has more than one meaning, many meanings, right? Notice the contrast, right? The beauty of Urus. Remember that passage we looked at last time about the beauty of Urus? This was, remember Shevek's feeling that this is what a planet should be like, right? And in contrast to the neatness and the beauty and the lushness of Urus, we have the tower, the fort. right? Heavy, ruinous, implacable, broken. Kay says, Le Guin, how are you this masterful in every nook and cranny of your prose? I know, Kay, I find it just amazing. Really amazing. There was still a fort in Drio, right? Again, see, like, Kay, I'd nominate that sentence too. I mean, look, it's like 2 sentences in 1 paragraph that encapsulate huge, sort of point to huge themes, right? There was still a fort in Drio. This is Urus, right? Is Urus like the like movies that they were shown in school, right? Those outdated movies that they were wondering, like, is that what Urus is really like? Is that what it really looks like? Oh, no, it's different, right? But there is still a fort in Drio, right? That ugly, implacable, heavy thing, right? Is still there, right? And of course, we can read between the lines here, right? Pei says it must be empty. Jafoilisk is hoping that Shevik is going to want to go tour it, because Pei obviously does not want to tour it. Pei has already lied and said it had been torn down. And then Jafoilisk is like, hey, isn't that the fort? Right? This is, of course, the competition between Thu and Aiyo, right? Jafoilisk, the Thuvian, is trying to undermine Pei and expose him, right? And presumably, there's something. It's probably still used as a prison or something, right? Yeah. Yes, Arthur. I was trying not to think of Tevildo, Prince of Cats, as well when I read about Thu. Noel asks, does Shevik know what a prison cell is like? Yeah, he does. Not literally. He wasn't the one who was shut into it, right? He's seen it from the outside, but of course locking out and locking in are the same process, right? And of course, he's been in a prison cell in a different way. Let's transition with it. Using that as a transition, I want to talk for the rest of the time tonight about Shevik's isolation. The metaphorical, psychological, social prison cell in which Shevik has found himself locked, and of which he does have a great deal of experience. Let's look at a bunch of things. Here's the single that he finds himself in when he gets to the Institute. Shevik's first reaction to being in a private room then was half disapproval and half shame. The paragraph before, remember, the narrator was explaining how only people who are like people that other people complain about, right? If you're set aside and made to live on your own, it's a judgment on you by the society, right? It's shameful. Half disapproval and half shame. Why had they stuck him in here? He soon found out why. It was the right kind of place for his kind of work. If ideas arrived at midnight, he could turn on the light and write them down. If they came at dawn, they weren't jostled out of his head by the conversation and commotion of 4 or 5 roommates getting up. If they didn't come at all, and he had to spend whole days sitting at his desk, staring out the window, there was nobody behind his back to wonder why he was slacking. Privacy, in fact, was almost as desirable for physics as it was for sex. But all the same, was it necessary? This is in that section. This is in the same portion of the book where he's having his moral qualms about eating desserts, right? Which he was taking 2 of, right? And he wasn't sure if that was a correct moral thing to do. What do we learn here? He feels half disapproval and half shame at finding that he's been put in a single to live alone, right? Disapproval because it's Unadonian, right? To just live on your own, right? You should live in a community. You should sleep in a dormitory. You should be part of the community. So he disapproves. just like he disapproves of the extra desserts. But he also feels shame, like they've passed judgment on him, right? Like he's being ostracized, like a wall has been erected around him and he's being quarantined, right? So then what conclusion does he come to? It's functional, right? It is in fact functional. He thought it was dysfunctional to be put in it. It's like either it suggests that he himself personally is dysfunctional socially, or it's evidence that this society that he's in is dysfunctional, right? Like the extra desserts and the single rooms themselves, by giving privilege to people who are there studying at the institute, not treating them the same as everybody else, that would be dysfunctional on a social level, right? So is it the society that's dysfunctional, or is it him that's dysfunctional? Well, then he comes to realize that it is functional. It's not dysfunctional. It's functional, right? This is the best kind of room for this kind of work. Because I am a physicist, it is best. It is most functional for me to have a single room, right? Yes, but it kind of makes it worse, too, right? James Stevens is wondering if he's being quarantined because he's learning Eotic. James, you're certainly right that if he's going to have books and papers written in Eotic, and Sabul doesn't want anybody else to know that he and his students are learning Eotic because the PDC might disapprove, then the best thing to do would be to make sure that his students are in a, his people, right, are in singles. So maybe, James, and I hadn't even really thought of that Sabul had arranged it, but of course I should have thought of it because there was a note from Sabul in the room when he gets there, right? Yeah. Yeah, Brian, you're right. We're never told that if that was the reason he was assigned the single room. Now, notice Shevek himself never seems to suspect Sabul of doing that, right? That it's the keep Eotic a secret line that it leads to his single room. That's something that's never raised in the text. It seems to me, though, perfectly fair, perfectly just speculation based on the other things that we've seen. Karita says he doesn't raise the question of what it would be like to have other people doing the same work. Great point, Karita. Notice, as Karita is pointing out, that in this passage he's thinking, oh yeah, it's totally okay for a physicist to be in a room alone, because if I were in a room with a bunch of other people, our schedules would be different, it wouldn't really work out. But yeah, Karita, what if you were with other physicists who are also working the same way? And who wouldn't misunderstand him and who wouldn't be necessarily bothering him, and right? I mean, it could be. That is to say, he might be sort of assuming his own isolation even more than is necessary. But of course, you see the problem, right? If to some extent it makes it better to say, oh no, this is functional for me, because the job that I have, the work that I do, makes it such that I need to be separated from society. So wait, okay, hang on. Then what does that say about you, right? It's not actually better, really. Yeah. Brian says it seems he's already given up on finding those other physicists. Yeah, because Brian, the only place where they are is in Urus, right? He might be able to hang out with Atro, but he can't do this with Sabul, right? So one prospect that's raised then, I think, by this passage is the question of, is Shevek fundamentally alienated, right? Is he separate? Is he isolated from the whole rest of society? Is he just different? Is the Odonian principle of brotherhood and solidarity, does it apply to everybody equally? Is it even possible to apply it to him? Is he immune to it because of the work that he does and the kind of person that he is? And that's kind of an alarming question. Let's go backwards. I want to go back to a passage from chapter 2 that I skipped at the time, and I mentioned that I really wanted to talk about it, but I've been saving it till we got to this whole question of Shevik's isolation from society, right? Let's look at this dream. If you read this passage describing Shevik's recurring dream and did not immediately know I was going to hone in on this and want to really talk about it a lot, then you don't know me that well, right? that was the if you guys have started that pool about predicting which passages we were going to do, this is the biggest gimme in the book so far. Um, the boy went to bed muddy-legged and dreamed. He dreamed. So this is, remember, he's dreaming. This is after he was kicked out of the sharing and the sharing and listening group, and he went and talked with his dad and had a fun night learning how a slide rule worked and talking to his dad about math. Right. The boy went to bed muddy-legged and dreamed. He dreamed he was on a road through a bare land. Far ahead, across the road, he saw a line. As he approached it across the plain, he saw that it was a wall. It went from horizon to horizon across the barren land. It was dense, dark, and very high. The road ran up to it and was stopped. He must go on, and he could not go on. The wall stopped him. A painful, angry fear rose up in him. He had to go on, or he would never come home again. But the wall stood there. There was no way. This is one of those passages, if you come back and reread this passage, like you go through the book, right? This is in chapter 2. Read chapter 3 and come back and read this passage again. Read chapter 4, come back and read this passage again. Read chapter 5 and come back and read this passage again. And every single time you come back, you'll see something different in this passage, right? At least that's my experience of it. This is a little more interesting. A little more abstract anyway, Jennifer, probably, than dreaming of eggs and bacon. I totally agree. Yeah. Now, Karita, I think that's a really interesting observation. Karita says there's no word on what the wall is made out of. And it might not be important, right? Yeah, I agree. It doesn't seem to be important what it's made out of, but that itself is kind of interesting, right? Especially, where does it start? Obviously, what we're supposed to be thinking of at the beginning is obvious, right? A road with a line across it. A line which is a wall, right? We know where we are. We were there at the first paragraph of chapter 1 of the book, right? The wall around the port of Benares, right? The wall which becomes merely a line when it crosses the road. So there's no gate, just a line across the road. So, okay. Karita, I do think it's interesting that we're not told what it's made out of, because it's that connection at first to the wall around the port of Benares makes it seem like he's having a dream about a real thing, right? And maybe it's sort of meant to be suggestive and sort of symbolic of something else, but it seems to have the dream seems to have its roots in a real thing. But it's not the mere literal extension of that physical thing. This is where I'm coming back to your observation here. It's not like it's a stone wall, but this stone wall is a super, super high stone wall, right? It's not because, of course, the wall where it crosses the road is merely a line, like the real wall, right? But we're told in that first paragraph, although it's really easy to cross that line, it's a line of very great significance. It's a really important boundary. Ideologically, there is a wall there. In Shevik's dream, the ideological wall, which Karita doesn't have any physical description, right? It's not a stone wall or something. The wall is impenetrable. Yeah, James, here the road stops at the wall. It's worse than a gate. It's that line, which is a mathematical thing, right? Just a line, right? A geometric thing becomes impenetrable. Kate says the reference to home jumped out. He could never come home again. What is home to a proper Odonian? Absolutely, Odonians shouldn't have homes, right? Because you almost have to say my home, right? It's proprietarian to have a home. We'll come back to that, Kate, but don't forget that observation, Kate, right? What is home to an Odonian? That passage should jump out at you, and I would hope more and more as we go through. Yeah, Noam says, I think the adjectives dense, dark, and very tall are all very important. The tall is the least important one. I think quite possibly, but dense, dark, I don't know if I'd say tall is the least important, Noam, but anyway, it's the wall is completely unsurmountable. That seems to me to be a really important thing about it, right? It is dark, you can't see through it. It is dense, you can't push through it. And it is tall, you can't climb over it. I mean, I think ultimately all three adjectives are designed, seem calculated to express the absolute nature of the barrier, right? Yeah. And yes, Brian, he perceives the ideological wall before he has ever had the chance to see the real wall. Yes, at that point in his life, he has never seen the Port of Anaris. He's never been there. We have, though, later in his life, in the previous chapter. And we'll come back to that. Noam thinks that dark also seems to have moral tones, and I agree. Even that sense of visual impenetrability, even if it only means it's dark, meaning you can't see through it or what's on the other side. Well, that kind of has moral implications too. I agree. Yeah. There is no way. Yeah. Oh, who was emphasizing that? Jennifer Miner says the road stops in the last line. There was no way. Makes her think that there's simply nothing but beyond it. Maybe, but of course he doesn't know, right? But notice, Jennifer, whether there is or not, he assumes that there is. He wants to continue down this road. So what do we have here? We have, yes, James, this is the same day he gets the Book of Numbers. Or, he's talking about the Book of Numbers. Okay, so the dream involves him needing to continue down the road, but the wall stops him. There is no way. He needs a way. He has a destination, and it's down the road, right? Following the road is what he does. It's who he is. It's what happens, right? In the dream, we're not told, of course. He doesn't know in the dream why he's trying to go down the road, but it's what he's doing, right? But the wall thwarts him. The wall stops him. The wall denies him permission. It's like a prison, right? Like the guards and the prisoners, right? To thwart the will of somebody else by arbitrary decree. Well, this wall is thwarting him, right? Just as the prisoner's desire to get out of the prison cell is going to be thwarted by the prison guards. More. He beat at the smooth surface with his hands and yelled at it. His voice came out wordless and cawing. Frightened by the sound of it, he cowered down, and then he heard another voice saying, "Look." It was his father's voice. He had an idea his mother Rulag was there too, though he did not see her. He had no memory of her face. It seemed to him that she and Palat were both, that's his father, of course, the father, right, were both on all fours, in the darkness under the wall, and that they were bulkier than human beings and shaped differently. They were pointing, showing him something there on the ground, the sour dirt where nothing grew. A stone lay there. It was dark like the wall, but on it, or inside it, there was a number. And 5, he thought at first. Then took it for 1, then understood what it was, the primal number that was both unity and plurality. That is the cornerstone, said a voice of dear familiarity, and Shevik was pierced through with joy. There was no wall in the shadows, and he knew that he had come back, that he was home. Later he could not recall the details of this dream, but that rush of piercing joy he did not forget. He had never known anything like it, So certain was its assurance of permanence, like one glimpse of a light that shines steadily, that he never thought of it as unreal, though it had been experienced in a dream. Only, however reliable there, he could not reattain it, either by longing for it or by the act of will. He could only remember it, waking. When he dreamed of the wall again, as he sometimes did, the dreams were sullen and without resolution. So this rush of piercing joy, the memory of which never leaves him throughout his life, right? And was unique in his experience, unattainable by will, unique in his experience with the dream. What's the joy? Let's go back and look at that again. What is it that causes him joy? His father and his mother are both there, on all fours, in the darkness under the wall, and they're not shaped like people. They're showing him something on the ground, something on the ground where nothing grew. So out of the barren earth comes a stone, and it's dark like the wall. So it looks to be made of the same substance, whatever that substance is, and we're never told. It seems to be made of the same substance as the wall. And there's a number on it, or in it. At first he thought it was 5. What's the significance of 5? Do you remember the significance of 5? What is 5? Remember the square? The numerical square? It's a little hard. This was right before this passage, so when you first read it, you probably would remember it, but it's now been a long time. 5 is the center. Kate, exactly. Yes. Remember, he liked, as he's walking around, he likes to picture the square, right, with the first 9 integers, right? Yeah, the 15 square with 5 in the center. Neil, exactly. So every way you add up the lines of 3 numbers, they add up to 15, right? He loves the beauty of it, the symmetry of it, the orderliness of it, and 5 is the center, right? So first he takes it for 5, the center of the square. Then he thinks it's 1, and then he recognizes it as the primal number. Now, what is the primal number? It's a concept. It's a paradoxical concept. The primal number is the number, the concept of which embraces both singularity and plurality, both unity and plurality at the same time, right? What should we be thinking of? What should that make us think of? It should remind us of simultaneity, right? Sequency versus simultaneity. The general theory that everyone is hoping he's going to come out with is the general theory that reconciles both sequency physics and simultaneity physics, right? Exactly, Brian. That's the primal number, right? What else? What about Odonianism, right? Plurality and unity simultaneously, right? I hear that on Anaris you treat the women just like the men, and he laughs, right? No, they're not the same, right? We do realize that men and women are different, but it's plurality. Everybody's different. Everybody has a different role, right? Everybody has a different personality, but unity, solidarity. Solidarity is different from singularity because it involves unity of a plurality, right? Yeah, Noam is thinking about Urus and Anaris. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that seems to, this is the cornerstone. Cornerstone of what? The thing there in the ground looks just like the wall. Is it the cornerstone of the wall? Like if you get it, you can take down the wall and get through? I don't know. I'm not sure I understand that. So this is what he's meant to do? Meant to do? By whom? Right? He's not under orders. But this is the joy that he finds in his life, this memory of this. Do you see why I transitioned the way that I did? I started with that passage about his dormitory room because it raised the question, is he just different? Right? Fundamentally different. Is there something wrong about him? Right? Yeah. Yeah, Kate says it's the cornerstone of home. Yeah. That is the cornerstone, said a voice of dear familiarity, and Shevik was pierced through with joy. There was no wall in the shadows, and he knew he had come back and that he was home. So, yeah, James, I don't know what that means either. There is no wall in the shadows, right? It doesn't say there is no wall anymore, like when he finds this thing which is the cornerstone, suddenly the wall vanishes. It doesn't say that. He's in the shadows, under the wall. The shadows are the shadows cast by the wall. But in the shadows, there is no wall. I don't know. I'm not sure I understand that. But then again, I don't understand the primal number either. He had come back. He was home. He was going somewhere, right? On the road, and finds that he's come home. We'll come back to this. Yeah, James suggests the cornerstone of his theory. That seems plausible. Oye asked him if he had seen the work on relativity theory by an alien physicist, Einstein of Terra. Shevik had not. They were intensely interested in it, except for Atro, who had outlived intensity. Pei ran off to his room to get Shevik a copy of the translation. It's several hundred years old, but there's fresh ideas in it for us, he said. Maybe, said Atro, but none of these off-worlders can follow our physics. The Hainish call it materialism, and the Terrans call it mysticism, and then they both give up. Don't let this fad for everything alien sidetrack you, Shevik. They've got nothing for us. Oh, sorry, Tom Hillman was saying if he's found the cornerstone, he has found a corner and can get around the wall, and so home. Maybe. Maybe it's a way to get around the wall. Possibly. Possibly. That's an interesting idea. There don't seem to be any corners to the wall around the Port of Anaris. It's a circle, right? Atro's attitude towards aliens, right? And his embracing of Setian physics. The us and them mentality of Atro, right? The us part is lovely. The solidarity that Atro seems to suggest exists, right? Between him and Shevik, between Uras and Anaris. That's kind of lovely. The they part is not quite so much, right? Don't let this fad for everything alien sidetrack you, Shevik. Right? Now that Einstein character, whatever. What does he know, right? Nobody else can understand our physics. What interested me here is where walls are being erected, right? Where lines are being drawn between us and them. But it's these drawing of lines, which in part is one of the things that I think we can see Shevek struggling with, right? Okay, but who's the us, right? Who is the us? And when Atro and Atro are having a conversation in chapter 5, in chapter 5, we see this struggle, right? Atro he rejects the Hainish who are aliens, right, have this theory that all life on other worlds, like Urus and Terras, which is of course the Earth, obviously, Einstein makes that fairly clear. We also get a relative dating of this story relative to Terran years for the first time here, right? But anyway, life on all of these planets originally came from Hainish, right? Atro rejects that, right? Because he wants to draw the line between us and them, right? That's where he wants to draw it. He's willing to encompass humanity, right? But he still wants the wall. He still wants the line. One of the things that this passage made me think is that it's another way to sort of ask about Shevek's character, right? Who is us? Where can we draw the line? Yeah, Kate, you're right. Atro calls the Terran that says the Terrans call Setian physics mysticism, which is like Sabel's criticism of Gvarab. You're absolutely right, Kate. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Let's keep going. I have been here for a long time, the room said to Shevek, and I am still here. What are you doing here? Is when he's looking at the furniture and everything in the room, right? And when he's there at the university and everything seems so old to him, right? Compared to how new things are in Anaris, right? I've been here for a long time and I am still here, which is of course the same thing the fort Drio says, right? What are you doing here? He had no answer. He had no right to all the grace and bounty of this world, earned and maintained by the work, the devotion, the faithfulness of its people. Paradise is for those who make paradise. He did not belong. He was a frontiersman, one of a breed who had denied their past, their history. The settlers of Anaris had turned their backs on the old world and its past, opted for the future only. But as surely as the future becomes the past becomes the future. To deny is not to achieve. The Odonians who left Urus had been wrong in their desperate courage to destroy their history, to forego the possibility of return. The explorer who will not come back or send back his ships to tell his tale is not an explorer, only an adventurer, and his sons are born in exile. As surely as the future becomes the past becomes the future. That should, of course, make you think of the simultaneity principle, right? And his theories about time. That should also remind you of the way the chapters are sequenced in this book, right? Good. Nancy was noticing the same thing about the fort, which is also still here. So Nancy, right, you can pursue that further. Ask the interesting question: what does the furniture in this room have in common with the fort at Drio, right? Anyway, Nancy thinks that last sentence might be her favorite sentence of all. The Odonians who left Urus had been wrong. Think about this acknowledgement by Shevek in relationship to the position he took in the argument with Tyrion at the end of chapter 2, right? We don't leave Anaris because we are Anaris, he says, right? It was about identity. just as Tyrion can pretend to be somebody else because he might like to imagine what it is like to be somebody else. He's always play acting, Tyrion is. But you can't. You can't leave your own skin, right? Remember Shevek telling Tyrion that? He made their presence. He made out their presence on Anaris to be a fundamental part of who they were, of their core identity, right? And now he's saying the Odonians who left Urus had been wrong. Wrong in their desperate courage, wrong to deny their history, to forego the possibility of return. So, Kate, another question they could be asking here, right, is where is home? Is Urus their home? Can they go home? Right? If you don't go home, you're not an explorer. You're an exile. Kate Neville says, which is home, the past or the future? Well, just as the future becomes the past, so the past becomes the future, right? Both simultaneously, right, Kate? Definitely. So what does this mean for him? What does this suggest about his society, about his relationship with his society? We'll keep pursuing this. We'll keep pursuing this next time. You're right, Kate Neville says, of course, Urus and Anaris circle each other, right? Yeah, they do. Okay, we'll continue this next time. There's more on the Shevek's solitude and the question of his solitude and his identity, his isolation that I want to keep looking at. Go back and review the conversation between him and Gavarab when he meets his mom, or not Gavarab, Rulag, his mom, when he has the fever and he comes out of the fever and he meets his mom. Go back and review that scene. One of the other moments I particularly want you to review. Of course, the conversation that he has with Takver, his partner, when they choose the bond. Yeah, we'll look at that stuff. And then, of course, I want to move on after we finish talking about that to talking about Badap and Badap's theories / revelations about Anaris and Anaresti culture. So we'll look at that next time. We'll look at those things, and then we'll get to and what happened to Tyrion. Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that, Neil. Absolutely, we'll talk about what happened to Tyrion. So we'll look at those things next time. Remember, no new reading. You keep reading if you want. I'm not saying you can't read, but we're not going to talk about anything new. We've got plenty of stuff still to talk about in these last couple chapters. So, and please, if you have any questions or topics that you would like to talk about or observations that you'd like to make, please do send me an email, and I'll try to incorporate. We'll see if we get a chance to incorporate some of those things in class next time too. I'm also hoping that I don't have. Thank you for bearing with me during the weird outages that I had here this evening, and I hope that won't happen again. Anyway, thanks very much, everybody, and I will talk to you. I will see you guys next week at the latest. Bye now.